We all recognize the pandemic has impacted our lives in ways we will always remember, and I think we'll be able to always kind of celebrate our resiliency and flexibility through all of it. So thank you again for joining us today. Looking forward to working together with you guys to archive your projects. I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth Francis, who is the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities, and she's going to offer some welcoming remarks before Ashley gets started with her presentation.
Thank you, Caitlin. It's great to be here with all of you, and thank you for for joining this workshop as part of XIX, Shall Not Be Denied, which is a platform, as you know, for publicity, social media engagement, branding, and resources for events and research and projects connected to the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which was a huge milestone in the long history of women's efforts for full citizenship. And that is a journey that is continuing in many ways. The Humanities Council and Secretary of State staff work together with over 30 partner organizations to develop values for this project and to promote and feature exhibitions, lectures, panel discussions, research, performances, and more all over the state around this milestone. The pandemic, as Caitlin said, definitely threw a wrench into events that had been planned in person, but over 50 were able to take place in person, virtually, and socially distanced through the incredible ingenuity, adaptation, and commitment of all of you. This year, despite the challenges, has been exciting and robust, or perhaps because of the challenges. And there was so much commitment to this anniversary, which suggests why the archive is so important. It's a gift to, and it's an investment in succeeding generations, those who come after us, who will look back and interpret this moment now in all of its complexity. So thank you. This work will help tell your story, and it will also help to assemble the collective story. I also want to announce, this is kind of hot off the press and it hasn't been announced widely yet, but that the Humanities Council has received additional funding from the Mellon Foundation to support engagement with related topics to Shall Not Be Denied, and will be working through the Shall Not Be Denied platform and with the Secretary of State's office and amazing staff around supporting projects connected to elections, citizenship, and voting, and related topics. So we'll be announcing a request for proposals soon, so be on the lookout for that. So back over to you for the workshop, Caitlin.
Thanks. I think this is the closest I'll ever be to being on TV, and we're live, and back to you. I was dying to share that news, so I'm glad you did, Elizabeth. So as Elizabeth mentioned, we're primarily all here today to ensure that the records of the Shall Not Be Denied initiative are properly preserved. As you guys know, the work we're doing now would not have been possible had the women of the Equal Suffrage Association not archived and kept their records 100 years ago now. So it's in that spirit that we're offering a workshop to make sure that you all have the tools you need to preserve and protect your records. So 100 years from now, folks are looking at the work we've done here this year as we sort of reevaluate the history of suffrage. So before we get started, I just want to throw out a shameless plug that we do have a new home at the Rhode Island State Archives. We've left our temporary home at 337 Westminster Street and moved to 33 Broad Street into a facility that's much bigger, provides much more modern research space, a state-of-the-art climate controlled and secure vault, and some really nice exhibition space. So we wish we could welcome you all in. Again, courtesy of COVID, you can't, but Ashley has a great 5-minute video tour on our YouTube channel that anyone can see to give you a taste for the space. And if you do want to come see it, you can reach out to the archives team and we can accept visits by appointment right now. So I'm going to turn it over to Ashley. Ashley is our State Archivist and Public Records Administrator, and she's going to be leading you through today's workshop. So again, if questions come up, feel free to chat them to me. Ashley's also going to pause at a few times through the presentation. If you prefer to raise your hand, we'll just call on you then too. All right, Ash, take it away.
Thanks, Caitlin. I'm just going to quickly share my screen so you can see our, I would love to say our beautiful PowerPoint, but it's definitely a PowerPoint that will hopefully help walk us through and give us some content to share. So this is obviously starting an archive, aka Archives 101. I want to welcome you all and thank you for joining us. I know for some people archives may sound like a really dry subject, so I hope what I'm here to share today will tell you, one, that it's not dry and that it's really unique and informative and pretty dynamic, but also what we need to help preserve the story of Shall Not Be Denied and all of the impeccable work that you've all done. I'm looking forward to sharing who we are and what we do at the State Archives and how we can and want to help with the archiving of the activity over the past year as we celebrated the centennial. So before I jump in earnest, just a little bit of history about the archives itself if you haven't worked with us before or aren't really familiar with who we are and what we do. So we are a part of the Division of Archives, Library, and Public Information that Caitlin mentioned earlier, obviously within the Department of State, Office of Secretary of State. Our division itself, in my opinion, is the most fun because we get to focus on curating, preserving, and providing access to public records to the people of Rhode Island and beyond. Sometimes that beyond includes, you know, Germany and Finland and Ecuador, so you never know who's interested in Rhode Island history. We at the Archives preserve and make available for research Rhode Island's historical public records beginning in 1638. That is our oldest record on site. We also have two, I'll call them mini offices within the archives itself. One is the Public Records Administration, which focuses on records management and helping state agencies organize their records so that hopefully they will one day come here. And then we have the Local Government Records Program, which essentially does the same and provides records management and archival advice to cities and towns. My quick shameless plug for the morning or afternoon now is just a really quick preview of our treasures. So as the slide says, we have more than 10 million records, over 83,000 online images that are growing every day. We're currently digitizing at a pretty rapid rate for our small staff, and they've been accumulating for quite a long time. These treasures represent a broad continuum of Rhode Island and early United States history. With these records, we promote and encourage research. We coordinate with outside agencies and outside institutions for guidance on public records. Using these records, we've partnered with public libraries in cities and towns, and really just the general public. This workshop is one of the ways that we aim to assist and provide this information that we house here to the community at large to continue to tell the Rhode Island story, and that includes the continuing story of women's suffrage and the expansion of those rights. Many of you may be familiar with the concepts that I'm going to cover today, but my hope is they'll provide a foundation for the archives, how we maintain these treasures, and how we can continue to do more with more recent records to tell that story that the Rhode Island Equal Suffrage Association started and that we will continue as we go forward. All right, shameless plug aside, we're going to dive in now. So this is our really first core principle. It's appraisal, otherwise sometimes known as assessment, but to break it down into very plain language, it's the system we use when talking about selecting what to save. Appraisal is a really key part of the archiving process and one that you'll be doing as you review the material that you've created over the past 10 months. Even if you don't know it, we every day are constantly doing records management and appraisal. When you get your mail at home and you look at it and you see your insurance policy and you say, okay, I'll keep this for 3 years until I get the next one. That's record management and personal archiving on your own. So you're establishing and appraising the value of what's in your hand. Records are created to meet administrative, legal, or fiscal needs, but they should be documented, and there's a primary value consideration for appraisal. These are the things that we look at and say, it's imperative because it documents X. Primary value, as the slide says, really looks at what was the original purpose, what does it document, what was the intent. That's a very important concept when we talk about state agencies, because it documents our interaction both in-house and with the public and how we achieve our mission. Often, records will have more than one value, be it primary, informational, or evidentiary. Sometimes they have all three of these core values, and it overlaps, and it's important to identify the core information and purpose of the record, or asking yourself, why is it valuable? Informational value, as the slide says, is really about what the record can tell us. The value of a record that provides unique and permanent information for the purpose of research. In some cases, that may be correspondence. We may have the records in the archives of public laws, but there's really unique correspondence to the governor that supports things that were happening in the state at the time. So that's an informational value in addition to its primary value. Evidentiary value is the value of the records potentially of a particular individual, family, organization, or corporate body, and it's necessary to provide an authentic and adequate documentation of the function. We also use evidentiary value when talking about things that just seem inherently valuable. So a document like that for the state archives would be the Declaration of Independence. That's pretty inherently valuable to the foundation of the United States, but also it's inherently valuable to give us that history. So as you start to review your activities over the past year, here are a couple questions that you might want to ask. What tells the story of this project or my part within the project? What documents the decision-making of the events and the mission of my program? And what interaction was there with the public? How did you communicate outward? How did you encourage and increase participation in your programs? These records have value to an agency or creator because they have basic administrative tools and functions for your business, and they document the organization and what you've done. And these things, over time, become historically pertinent. A really simple example may be, I'm going to go back to the Equal Suffrage Association, because those records are a unique treasure trove, and they contain a calendar of the president of the association, which sounds pretty droll, you know, like what meetings you have every day, who was there, what did you speak to them about? But to us, 100 years later, looking at that and seeing that in, I'm not going to pick a random date because I don't want it to be wrong, that on a date on her calendar, she had a meeting with Emmeline Pankhurst when she was traveling within the United States. That's significant to us now, but it felt very everyday then. That was a lot of information to throw. Before I move on to the next slide, does anybody have any questions? Okay, then I will shift gears just a little bit. We're still talking a little bit about appraisal, but this is a little bit more of a straightforward. When I give presentations, I tend to like to focus on questions. We all know how to answer questions, or it causes us to think. So this is me looking at thinking about collections. And rather than allowing myself to go too deep down the technical and jargon rabbit hole, let's see what these questions are, or how we can think about curating the collection. You know, the first, identifying archival documents of interest. What stories can you uncover? What would you be curious about? If you were on the outside looking in at your own materials and documents, what's something that you think is fascinating and could lead someone to ask more questions? It can be really difficult to look at a mass of digital files or physical documents and flyers you sent out and think that they can be put together into something cohesive. But spoiler alert, they can, and they will be. First, you want to take a look at what's of interest. Were there key moments that you captured that you can document through your activity and your community communications that will be interesting to future generations? That goes back to our first question. While these things may feel everyday to us, it will be someone else's research project in the future to see how the centennial mattered and how it was celebrated. We look back 100 years ago with significance, and then the same will happen 100 years from now. Each generation is fascinated with the previous generation's excitements, for lack of a better term. I imagine how much fuller the picture could be if we continue to expand and write more and more down. With every historical collection, there's always a weakness. There's always something that isn't necessarily covered because the person that was documenting the history wasn't thinking that way or didn't have that perspective. So the more we're able to garner and gather and continue to ask those questions, that's what makes these collections really important. We really want to focus on how these things connected with other organizations. We really want to think big picture when looking through your material. What story is there to uncover? If you could visit the past, what celebrations would you have wanted to know about that the Equal Suffrage Association did? We have a lot that we've celebrated and a lot to still celebrate, and there's still a lot of work to be done, and this is what documents that and how we felt in this moment. Really, all of these questions boil down to the same idea. How does what I have potential to tell a deeper story, give a deeper truth, and push someone to dive deeper? We want to engage people to continue to want to learn more, which is, as an archivist and former librarian and researcher, I love digging in, and I find it a huge part of who I am that I always try to get others to do the same, for better or for worse. Okay, this is the last slide on appraisal, I promise. Why archive is a pretty big and existential question, but the very, very short answer is so there's something to be discovered later. I've used the word discover a lot, and it's a little bit redundant, but at the same time, it's a really core principle of archives. We have the big why, like when you're writing an essay, and the big answer is often in order to be found. So I continue to use that word, and I hope you'll excuse it, but I find it to be very important. We know what's happening now, but today's children won't. I did an internship many years ago, and my supervisor at the time, who I admired very much, her name was Jane Gilchrist, once told me what we do for the young scholar today makes a lifelong scholar tomorrow, which I believe applies here, but even more, it's for the curious citizen and armchair historian. What we look at today and what we encourage people to look at today will create the next generation of stakeholder and researcher and just fascinated citizen, which is really what we want in any archive, but specifically at the state archives, because we want people to engage with their government in a way they maybe haven't before. We want them to know that they can discover more about themselves and the state and how they themselves are represented in this period of time through our public records. So to look at the slide itself, why select items to archive? It's just to tell the story. If we don't document it, who will, right? Sometimes in a moment in history, we look at something and we say, well, somebody else will do it. But what if they don't? Then we're missing the unique part that you can tell. So how can you select items to archive, which is something I said earlier. I'm going to circle back with it, which is what tells the story of the project, what documented the decision making, what activity did you do, and how did these events interact with the public and demonstrate your mission and part of shall not be denied. Again, I'm going to take a quick pause. Caitlin, or were there any questions in the chat?
I am not seeing any, and I don't see any hands up.
Okay, great. Then I will move forward. So our next little section of this presentation is archiving with your help. In theory, what we're looking for is pretty straightforward. We want to capture the goals, activities, final products, and even outcomes of your associated endeavors and events as part of Shall Not Be Denied. Because the State Archives holds all public records, it's important that we don't take on records that contain private information or PII, such as phone numbers or birth dates. An immediate example of a prime candidate for archiving would be final marketing materials that were used to encourage people to join the events or programs, an email blast, a copy of a newsletter, an agenda for a meeting, or even letters and emails of people responding saying how much they loved the event. Those are really great examples of materials. This slide breaks it down into what we do and what we don't want. So we do want documentation of your activity, information and collateral, a wrap card that you created, something that you put out. Join us, celebrate the centennial, and really any final product that you may have produced. Again, what we don't want like a contact or an email list. That should stay in-house. We don't want information that would compromise someone if it was published as a public record. And we don't want tons of duplicates, especially when you're talking about digital records. So if you're thinking that you have a lot of virtual material to transfer to us, we really only need 2 copies of anything. We have one for preservation and one for redundancy. Moving forward, I wanted to share a little bit, and this is, I have in my notes, the fun part for me, which is what we do with your material. Once the appropriate material is established, this is a really quick and dirty list of what we do to process it for preservation. To assess, we've gone over that already, which is the appraisal part and review of the documents, but description is the next big portion that's going to require your help in the future. The more information and context you can provide about what you feel is worth saving, the more information, the better we can describe the record and make it most useful for the future. That context is incredibly important for archives. I'll show you a little bit later on how description looks in our online catalog, just to offer an example and to bring it back around, and how much of a difference it makes when we can share the date it was created, who created it, where it came from. Those are all very important things. Physical control, which is the next item on the slide, has a subsection in control of digital objects. So just as the slide says, we take records we receive and put them in appropriate boxes and in maintaining original order. And then the physical control, which is labeling and barcoding, that allows us to have proper intellectual control, to use a library term, over the records, to know what we have, what it's called, and what it belongs with, so that we don't have, as an example, a letter to the governor just tucked into a prison state ledger. That's not physical control. We would never be able to find that. So we take any material we receive and kind of sort it and classify it and put it where we can find it, and then we add it to the catalog. The same happens with the digital counterpart. It gets filed in our virtual catalog, and it gets given a name, gets labeled, it gets assigned a location, even if it's a virtual one. And then preserve is sort of the very foundation of what we do. All of these steps equal preservation. So we often will rebox and replace non-archival things. We'll remove anything that's on it that's not archival to the best that we can. I'll take this moment to say, if you haven't already, please don't put tape on anything if you're going to transfer it to us. Tape is one of the enemies of archives. It is very acidic and it will eat away at paper, believe it or not. We actually have a record here that is a baptismal record that somebody tried to sort of, I'll call it home style laminate with clear packing style tape at some point, probably in the 1930s. And the tape completely ate away the paper, and the tape itself is now the record. It has an impression of the ink on it. So the paper is now gone. So if you don't have tape on anything physical that you think needs archiving, please don't put any on, because it takes a lot of work to keep those materials safe once they've been affected that way. That said, if you do have records with tape that you feel they're important, still send them to us. That's just a hint for long term. All right, this is a little bit more complex, so I think I'll pause for 1 second just to make sure we don't have any questions again before I dive in.
I'm not seeing any.
All
So I
right.
think you can keep moving. I think everybody's going to save them for a lively discussion at the end.
At the end.
Yeah,
Pop quiz at the end. That's fine. Not a problem. I just want to make sure. So this is the bit that is both fascinating and can be a little bit overwhelming. So I've tried to break it down here as best I can, but we do also have a digital archivist on staff. So if you have some really nitty-gritty questions about these, we can connect you with both myself and her. But first, when we're talking about born digital material, so that's a Word file, a PDF, an audio file, any of those things, if you're going to offer them for preservation here, these are the primary 4 steps: identify, document, and transfer. So we want to know what the digital materials are so that we can prepare them for that accession and transfer. We want to know the file type. Now, this doesn't sound super imperative, but it definitely is. So in the world of digital preservation, when we're talking about file types, they all have different needs. They have different, what's called checksums when you put something in. The easiest way to explain a checksum is you put a document in, you check its binary code, all those ones and zeros, and then periodically throughout the life of the record, you make sure none of those binaries got corrupted. They're each a little bit different. Every document has a different code. So that's really important for us. Now, obviously, if you're not sure and you just transfer us some content, we will know what it is, but it's best if we know ahead of time so we can prepare for any migration that we might need to do. We want to document the way the media was stored. So if it was stored in a cloud drive, if it was on a desktop, that's just good information for us to have, and then actually transfer the material. So we would work directly with you. We have a couple of ways we're able to safely do that based on, Department of State cybersecurity standards. We can't just use a Google Drive type of a situation, but we do have ways that we can. A couple of questions that you can ask yourself when talking about digital records, I would say one would be, where do I keep the records? Are they all in one place? If not, can I put them all together in one place? What did I use them for? I think there's a difference between a subject file and, a list for your own to-dos versus, a draft to a final product that you kept digitally. And then, do I have access to external storage to transfer these items? So keep that in mind. If you don't have a device that goes over 5 gig, but you have a lot of material you want to transfer, we would then work with you for a safe OneDrive transfer. So that is the initial what we need from you. Essentially, it's a, what is it? How much is it? How did you keep it? So this is a very short version of what we do. This is a really easy place to get very, very bogged down in technical terms. So essentially what the State Archives does is we're very fortunate that we have a very good online system known as Preservica. It's a trusted digital repository that helps us in the preservation of virtual records. It assists with the accessioning, which is the physical transfer into the system, processing, and preservation. So first, Preservica is known as an OAIS compliant platform, which essentially is an open archival information system, which operates on a really imperative principle that goes from who's looking at the record, how the record will be used, and the function, which is a bit more granular than you need, but that is pretty much to say that the OAIS ensures that it is both open-ended on the back end, that we are being transparent in our process while also securing our records properly. The second part of this process is it goes through a workflow to ingest or bring it into the platform, like uploading and preserving the records. It can depend on a few factors. So normally we ask questions about the types of files that you're sending and the size and arrangement, because that may influence the amount of time it takes to upload the records. Or if we have to run something called normalization, which is essentially if you have a PDF, we want to normalize it to an archival standard, which is a PDF-A. Luckily for us, Preservica does a lot of that work for us. And what Preservica doesn't, we're typically able to do with Adobe Suite, believe it or not. So as the transfer of large quantities of digital records are uploaded, we then take that through a process to then make it virtually accessible in our catalog. Preservica directly links to our catalog, which is catalog.sos.ri.gov. I'm going to show you a screenshot in a couple of minutes. And those two platforms together make it so that we're able to do that, preserve and make accessible together. I'm going to take a breather and not say anything else super jargony, but I hope that gives you a little bit of a background that not only are we accepting your records, we're doing more with them than just putting them in a file on my desktop. We're putting them somewhere that will consistently ensure that they're readable and accessible and protected. If it comes across an object that one of those ones and zeros looks like it might be questionable, it will create a new version of that record, which is why we use this system. It helps us do as much as we can to remove the risk of technological obsolescence, that it will still be readable. Because when you're talking about digital records, that is the biggest fear, that in the future, someone won't be able to read it. It's like when you open a document from 2005 and it's in Klingon. We're trying to avoid that. Were there any questions in this section?
I don't see any questions from our audience, but I'll ask a question, which I know you love when I do. I think a lot of what people are concerned about or have questions about when sending things off to us at the archives, or we do hear this a fair amount, is are people going to be able to access it and use it? So with Preservica and the systems that we have in place, how do we ensure that things are accessible and easily so for people trying to search the records?
So we have two consistently active platforms. The first is Preservica. Preservica has both a front end and a back end. So we upload everything on our side, and then we have a universal access site, or just a public facing digital archive that does have a search function. The digital archives is organized based on both theme and record group. So we have thumbnail collections of public laws. We have a thumbnail collection of all of the city and town establishing documents in our records. But then we also have a topical collection called Women in Rhode Island, which we have things about voting in there, about the Equal Suffrage Association, and more documents that are specific to women being involved in government. So that is one way. So once it gets loaded into Preservica, we're able to make it pretty much immediately publicly accessible via browsing. If you know about what topic you're looking for, there's a great way to go through and look that way. But then you can also use a search bar, which is in the top right corner of the digital archive. The other way to search our records is through the catalog itself. Now you can browse the catalog as well, but when you search in the catalog, it's similar to if you've ever used a public library catalog. You can type in an exact title, you can type in a keyword, for example, Roger Williams, and search results will come up that you can actually sort and nest like you would in almost any other search engine. So if you imagine when you're searching in Amazon, you can filter by what's on Prime or what has 4 stars. Similar type situation, you can filter the results based on date of creation or author or what agency it came from. So I personally like the search on the catalog a little bit better because you can do that sort of drop-down searching, but both offer a searching option. And if there is a digital object, it is referenced in the catalog and then it links out to Preservica. So once we're able to upload it, within a day, it's accessible to the public. Did that answer the question, Caitlin?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So this is just a little bit of information on how we keep records safe. We sort of just went into a bit of the digital. So centralized and shared drives that are designated by agency policy is a way that we're very driven here. And we also believe in duplication when keeping things protected in digital form. So that means we have one copy in Preservica, as I mentioned, but then we also have duplicates saved on physical external hard drives and in another cloud service that is not linked to Preservica. One of the best ways to keep information accurate is when you're thinking digital, you want to keep things like file names short and meaningful. You don't want to add spaces or symbols like periods, because that will actually make the computer believe it's a file extension when it's not. And you want to include a version number if you're transferring something that had more than one version on it. When we're looking at physical storage, which is our middle one here, those pictures are of archival friendly boxes. So the one on the left is a record carton, which is a standard cubic foot. It's the kind of box you would see probably in an office that you can pick up. On a bad day, they're as heavy as 60 pounds. They fit a lot of paper. That smaller box is what we call a Hollinger box. It's about half size. And that is often where we'll put volumes that are very delicate so that we can shelve them laying down versus up on their spines. When you're thinking about preserving in your own area, in your own archive, there are some really general tips on this slide for physical storage. So you want to use acid-free material. That means it won't eat away at the paper. You want to be uniform, which is why we use those boxes that are in the center. Choose a physical location that's dry and free from light or dust. That's one of the reasons we love our new space so much. Our vault is completely dedicated and the lights go off after a couple of minutes if one of us forgets to turn it off. Not that that happens. And then you want to avoid non-archival fasteners. like paper clips, metal bands, not metal bands, rubber bands, excuse me, or, you know, those brads. I have a jar here on my desk. I know I'm not the big image right now, but these are non-archival fasteners that we've removed over the course of history. I can show it when I'm full screen again. So those are just general tips for storage, whether or not it's being transferred here or you just want to kind of improve your own office space. Those are our sort of primary top 4. Keep it secret, keep it safe. Maybe not secret, but definitely safe. All right, so now we're moving into that nitty-gritty about description I mentioned. This is the screenshot from the State Archives catalog. Unfortunately, I didn't know we'd be talking about the tiered searching, so I did not include that part in my screenshot. But this does capture how it displays. So this will show you at a quick glance what we include in descriptions and how it gives a lot more context. So this is the name of the record up top, Commission to Encourage Morality in Youth, which is one of my favorite things that exists in our collection. I think it's really funny. And then it goes down and gives you a bit more information, which includes the scope of it, which is that these records include meeting minutes and annual reports, and a Supreme Court opinion that sort of was a trigger for this whole movement. It tells us the date of the record, in this case a date span from 1956 to 1964, who created it, which is the commission. And then it gives biographical and historical information. So depending on the record in the State Archives catalog, that section, or this section here, if you can see my mouse, can be very big. So that's why it's not expanded. But we've put a lot of information there, the more the better, because that's that piece that draws the researcher in and says, well, that's a really interesting and weird scenario. Why was it that way? And then you also have the extent, which is essentially the size of the collection. Whether it's digital, the extent might be 6 gigabytes, whereas in this case, it's 0.02 cubic feet, which essentially equals a file folder. And then we also include the language. So we identify the vital record for preservation so that it says when it was made, who made it, where did it come from. The second slide I'm going to show you right now is the second half of the description. So there's a lot to be seen here, and we try and put in everything that we can. So this provides an overview, the arrangement information, which is whether or not it's in alphabetical, chronological, numerical order. That's what would go in that spot. If it's linked to the digital archives, which this one is, so this is a good example based on Caitlin's question. If this was an active site, which it's just a screenshot, but if I clicked right here, it would bring me to the copy in the digital archives. We then go into subjects, record groups, and then related terms. One of our long-term goals for the archives here is to expand the bottom of this information to add additional tags. We have some limited tags right now, but that's one of the ways that we can actually continue to increase and better our own catalog. So all of that, it may sound like a lot of information, and in some cases it is, but some of the information is very natural and easy to identify. You know when you created the material, 2020 or 2019, because you worked on it a year ahead of time. You know who created it, since you're archiving for your own institution. You know what language it's in, and the subject, women's suffrage or the centennial of the 19th Amendment. So already, even if it's not written down, you have the basic metadata that we have over here in this side column. So it may seem overwhelming, but like many things in archives and records management, when you break it down to its constituent parts, it's much more accessible than it initially sounds. So moving forward, this is the fun part. At least I think so. Once the State Archives has a record, we do the best we can to make it accessible to anyone anywhere, which is the question Caitlin was getting at earlier. So I wanted to highlight the description and metadata you can see online for digitized records, but also show you what transferred records would look like in a digital environment, depending on if it was something that we had to digitize or it was digital itself. So this object is actually from the main folder, Public Laws and Private Acts. Sounds pretty boring. It is actually remarkably not when you look at the old historic ones. And as you can see, this document is, or I hope you can see, if not, I'm going to try and point it out for you. It is from May 1775. The name of the document is up here. So this is a screenshot from the digital archive. And any digital object that we have nested here will actually be in a nested PDF. So it's not going to open a new tab on you every time you want to look at a virtual record. It just loads in the page you're in, which is personally one of my favorite things that it does, because I hate when websites open a new window. I find that very infuriating on a personal note. So as you can see up here, when we do these digital objects, we want them to say the name of the object, the type of it, which this is an asset, so it's nested underneath something else, and where it's stored, which in the case of this record, it's stored in the folder of public laws and private acts. So this is just one example of how we show digitized records to the public. The next one I have for you, and my only other example, is genuinely one of my favorite things in our collection. So the State Archives is home to the state's governmental history, but it actually has a wide and unique collection. We've spent a lot of time over the past few years trying to remove the old dusty room stigma from what archives are. Not the least of which because that's the worst you could do to guarantee the longevity of a record, but because we want people to recognize that the archives is relevant to them. Part of that is you and the records that you're going to eventually transfer here about the Shall Not Be Denied program. And we continue to do those things, but it is also a part of helping people explore records like these. This part of the presentation is a little bit of a shameless plug for the archives, and I hope it will encourage you to check out the materials we have online. This particular one that's highlighted, I think you can see the highlight of the text to give him 100 pounds of the petitioner's own money if he would give the petitioner a dose of poison, as would dispatch him. This was actually a petition from a man named Benedict Arnold, not the Benedict Arnold, but a predecessor. And he was petitioning for divorce because his young wife was slowly trying to poison him. Not something you would expect to find in a government archive, but it is there, and it is not the only ridiculous and dynamic thing that we have. So I also wanted to show you this record to show you that there is a great variety of things that you might have that might absolutely be of interest. So don't forget to give a wide view of what you have before you think about what you want to transfer. We also have other really fun things in our collection here if you want to browse and get a sense of what else we have and how it might align with what you have and what you're ruminating on in your own mind. We have genealogy and family history resources, maps and plans, one of my personal favorites, petitions, photographs. We have the Rhode Island Folklife collection. We also have military records. I actually found my own great-grandfather's World War I bonus card last week, looking on my own time to try and find some information. So it's really fascinating what you can find. So don't underestimate how what you have can fit into what we have. All right, that's it for my shameless plug. Now we have some next steps. Now that you know what the archives can be, it's really your turn to start thinking about your own materials. These steps: review your records, decide how you want to preserve your story, and organize your collection, are how to start thinking about your own materials and how you can prepare for a future transfer once everything is fully done and closed and your events have been successful and are done. So if I can leave you with one piece of wisdom, it's that archiving is active, not after the fact. The records live on for a really long time, but archiving itself can happen as you go. Think about it as you go along. Does what I'm holding have primary value? Is it evidence of a movement or a celebration? Does it provide information that people might not find elsewhere? And also, personally, I think it's important to think, is the perspective I can offer unique and important? And the answer to that is pretty much always yes. Don't underestimate what you have to share about the documentation and to be a part of the documentation. And then work as you go. And I think you're really going to find a lot more than you expected. And there's going to be more in your records that future generations will want to know. So I hope that my probably a little bit too fast talking and excitement about archiving in general was helpful. That's the last slide of the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have them. If not, I can pass it back to Caitlin. Caitlin, have you gotten anything new or?
I have not seen any questions, but I think we're going to just kind of open it up for a discussion. Sometimes it's easier for everyone. So everyone can take down this contact information. We will also drop it in the chat for people, so you have a direct way of getting in touch with us. And then if anyone has questions, I invite you to just raise your hand, or if we want to be really adventurous, we can just trust that we'll all unmute ourselves in an orderly fashion and ask anything that might come up. Elizabeth?
Yes. So thank you so much, Ashley. That was really, really interesting. You made it seem doable, and also why it matters and why it's valuable. So thank you. But I wanted to ask about how do archives talk to each other? So how does the State Archives talk to the Providence Public Library, to other, to the Athenaeum, to the Redwood Library, to, university archives? I know that there may not be a good answer to this, but the Humanities Council has a remarkable archive of our grant making over close to 50 years. That's, in our conference room, all in these demure gray, archival boxes. But there is astonishing stuff in there, and they could tell, they do tell, and they could tell really remarkable stories about how people thought about their work, and how it's relevant now. And we've done a little bit of work around curating the archive, making it more available, doing some digitization. Of course, it's a huge effort, and we do have an Omeka digital library that's also serving as a digital repository for example, the Arts and Culture Research Fellowship, which did over 200 Wikipedia profiles on arts and cultural producers.
That's great.
Okay, so then the question is, well, okay, we've got all this great stuff, but how does everybody know? How does everybody know what, that there is these resources available, and how can they connect with each other? I know that you may not have the answer. I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, I have a little bit of an answer, which is one of the things that we try to do at the State Archives is we try to give as many recommendations to researchers as we can, right? So if we have a researcher who's interested in, a common one we get might be a court minute book, right? They want to come in and they want to learn about a specific person, and then they realize that they have records that may have been considered judicial. We know immediately to recommend them to the Judicial Record Center, where they actually have minute books of court proceedings, or if they want to look at specific things that may be at the Historical Society, we'll transfer them over there. Now, we stay updated on what everybody has as best we can through general looking at other people's websites, so that we're able to help our constituents as much as we can. But also, I like to read the Special Collections listserv that was started by OLIS. That's a really great connection tool because there are multiple kinds of libraries on there. I know that PPL is on that list. We read that list. So that's a great communication tool. There was also a couple years ago, the Special Collections Roundtable was started. That's another way that we're able to connect with other archival institutions. So I think the short answer is it's an imperfect system, but we do our best to learn so that we can send researchers to the right place. But there's no centralized location that I know of. I wish there was. There are some databases though that list historical societies in Rhode Island and what they have. I think the Rhode database, and then the Historical Records Advisory Board recently attempted an update. It still needs a little work. That's a directory of repositories. So those are two resources that we have, but I think at least the advisory board I can speak to directly is not complete and is still under update as much as we can. So those are two ways, but I'm sure it's always something that can improve. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so everybody can kind of, there we go. Anybody else have a question?
I have a question.
Sure.
So I held a women's story sharing event recently, and I'm just curious about the use of anything that I may upload or that you archive that other people could access and use elsewhere, just for the sake of, you know, making sure that all my speakers are okay with that or that kind of thing. So just curious, like if people see or hear any materials online digitally, are they able to take them from the site and use them in some way?
Technically, yes. So anything that comes to the state archive is considered a public record. So we would go through a transfer process where custody would be signed over to us. That's one of the more formal parts of the process. We do have some limited ability to close records for a short period of time, but it's not the goal of the state archives. It's probably the easiest way to say that. You know, we want to be as open and transparent as we can. And that's really our role, especially for state government, is to guarantee that transparency. So once it's with us, it is considered public. So that is something to consider. That's why I mentioned personal identifiable information earlier in the presentation, because we don't want anyone to feel compromised by the materials being shared.
Thank you. It's helpful. Thank
Sure.
you.
Any other questions or thoughts, ideas for additional trainings too? There will be another round of workshops. This is sort of Archives 101, but you can expect us to be offering a 201, which will be a little bit more of a deeper dive. But I invite any other thoughts anyone has or any other questions too. All right, hearing none. As we say in all of our board meetings, I won't force us to hang out till 1:30. Everyone can go get lunch, have a snack, whatever you need to do, take a walk. The sun is trying to come out. It's not really working. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate your time, your attention in the middle of the day. We hope you found this helpful. If you didn't, let us know. We want to be, we're constantly looking to improve. And, you know, we're excited to be able to accommodate a lot of what the great work that's happened in this initiative over the last year as part of the State Archives collection. I think curating the story and deciding what we preserve and how we preserve it and what gets added to the archive will be critically important. And as you know, because we're all to some extent involved with public history or research, what gets saved is ultimately what we use to reimagine and reflect on these stories. So really important. This is a great moment for Rhode Island. I think this is a pretty cool initiative, unique based on what we've seen across the country. And so we're really excited to be taking it in as part of the State Archives. So thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. And we'll be in touch soon with another offer for another workshop, I'm sure. Appreciate you all. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.